All right, we're live.
Hello, hello.
Hello.
Hey everyone. Did we decide who's the moderator? How do we want to go about this? Hey everyone, welcome for this Twitter space and thank you for tuning in. We just need to figure out who's the host, who's asking question. How do we go about talking about this thing?
I can ask the questions if that works. But I think we can all switch roles of moderator to decide who
Absolutely.
wants to take it.
All right,
Um,
let's go.
okay, awesome. So do you guys want to introduce yourselves a little bit first, or you just want to kind of jump right into the good stuff?
No, you're right. I think it's a good point. I'm Henry. I do DevRel at the Starknet Foundation.
And I'm Adrian. I work in the product team at the foundation as well.
And then I'm Francis, and I work on the BD team at StarkWare proper.
Very nice. So what are we talking about today, Francis, exactly?
Well, today we're going to be talking about the very exciting subject of scaling Bitcoin with Starks. Um,
Ooh.
so obviously that's predicated on a specific opcode coming to Bitcoin. But regardless, we figured we'd front run the issue, so to speak, a little bit, both by trying to illustrate what some of the advantages of scaling Bitcoin with Starks might be, as well as maybe answering some open questions that the community might have around scaling Bitcoin with Starks, or just what Starknet's focus will be currently and going forward into the future.
Super cool. So where should people ask questions?
I believe that the best place to ask questions would just be on the the Twitter comment section,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I guess YouTube as well.
YouTube as well. Oh, I
Right.
didn't even know we're on YouTube. Oof.
Very nice. So yeah, feel free, people listening who are listening, feel free to ask the questions on YouTube, on Twitter, and on LinkedIn. Thank you, Deborah. Yeah, maybe let's get a little bit into the topic. So, Francis, can you just summarize what was the announcement this week? What exactly was announced?
Yeah, absolutely. So this week, Starkware and Starknet announced just first of all, overall, an interest in Bitcoin and becoming the first expressive L2 built on top of Bitcoin. Specifically, what that entailed was using Stark proofs to scale Bitcoin, and the way that we would do that is by essentially using the locking scripts that exist within UTXOs or the script field, and within that script, we would place a Stark verifier. So Bitcoin has 48 or so opcodes. We would use those opcodes in order to, with the addition of opcat, in order to use all of the arithmetic, all of the math we need to actually emulate a Stark verifier. So we could go through the process of having every single Bitcoin full node be able to verify a Stark proof. So with that, you could actually embed a full virtual machine, for example, Starknet, on top of Bitcoin directly. In addition to this, we began to sort of advocate our support towards opcat. Opcat is the ability to concatenate two objects within Bitcoin script. This is specifically useful for the ability to verify Merkle trees, which is really kind of the brunt of what the underpinnings of Stark proof verification are based off of. And then last, and I think this one's really important, we want to make sure we're good stewards of both the Bitcoin protocol and Starknet. And so in doing so, we've announced a $1 million fund, which will be somewhat separated from both Starkware and Starknet. And it will be both for and against research around OpCat. So reasons to activate OpCat, reasons not to activate OpCat. And again, that'll be $1 million directed towards researchers who are interested in taking on the subject and providing valuable insight to the Bitcoin and Starknet communities.
Super cool. Thank you for the context. So maybe let's unwrap a little bit because there's a lot of content here. So the announcement, so there's the fund, right? So there's a $1 million fund to advance research on Bitcoin because research can go in both direction. We do it or we don't, which is extremely like this effort is really exciting. Can we get a little bit into the the technicals. I mean, you were a little bit technical already, and specifically, my understanding was that in order to get the ZK rollup to settle on top of Bitcoin, you actually need two things. You need to verify the Stark proofs, which, from what I understand, OPCAT helps, but it's not entirely necessary. I think that's my first question. And the second is, you need some kind of notion of state, right? You need to be able to perpetuate the state of your ZK rollup across transactions, which is not possible today on Bitcoin. So, Adrien, do you want to maybe explain a little bit, like are Stark proofs possible on Bitcoin as it is today? And what is exactly the dependency on OPCAT? Do we need it exclusively for state to get to get covenants, or do we also need it for Stark proofs?
Yeah, we would need it for both, and obviously we can keep searching alternatives with current opcodes that Francis mentioned, but really OPCAT is a very powerful unlock and make it a lot more realistic. So that being said, with OPCAT, as you mentioned, we need also, on top of the verifier that Francis already explained, we need some kind of state. This is very common in pretty much all the other ecosystem but Bitcoin, which is a script base, which has its own kind of its own language and its own way of working. And the way we would leverage OPCAT to get into some kind of stateful, not VM, but execution environment is by introducing covenants, like you mentioned. This is it's a great feature that to some extent already exists in Bitcoin script. A covenant is simply a way to, if we try to put it, the simplest way to put it is, how do I put rules on the spending of my UTXO? Because today when you spend a UTXO, the very simple use case is I send my Bitcoin to you, and basically you being just a public key. But once I've done that, you are the owner of the UTXO and you can do whatever you want. But so this is the main use case that everybody can think about. But there are already some opcodes that can actually try to start doing some type of covenant, but very limited. So it's one example is a time lock. So I can put a time lock. So I can kind of forbid you to or prevent you from spending that UTXO until a certain amount of time. This is an example in this very simple. So what we are looking at is more covenants, more features to kind of control the way these UTXO are spent. And the objective of that is what Francis mentioned already, is that we want to make these UTXO spendable or not, depending on the result of the verification of the proof, right? So with these two constructs, one is the verifier, the other one is kind of make the UTXO spendable or not, depending on the result of that verifier. With these two constructs, we kind of have, what the basics, the foundation for rollup, right?
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Adrien. All right. I guess another question that many people have is, I mean, StarkWare has been developing scaling solutions on Ethereum for the past 4 years, and it has had an amazing success at doing so, both with StarkX and with Starknet. What does expanding to Bitcoin mean? Does it mean that StarkWare is going to focus exclusively on Bitcoin now? Does it mean that Starknet is going to be an Ethereum project? Well, maybe actually I'm gonna talk a little bit about this. I think that well, first of all, as Francis said, the announcement was made yesterday. It's mostly manifesting an interest in research, right? All of this is for now mainly a research effort and funding research effort, which is exciting to a lot of people, Bitcoiners and Ethereans alike. It doesn't mean that Starknet is moving away from Ethereum. Of course not. It means that it's expanding. It's looking at other places where it can bring scaling, and it's looking at ways where it can do more with the same tech. Also want to mention that it's not a given that OPCAT will be shipped on Bitcoin. That's the first really important thing to mention. I mean, the Bitcoin community will decide on this and will be respectful of that decision. And then even if that happens, Starknet, the Starknet community will also need to decide and express their will around what exactly should the intersection of Starknet and Bitcoin be, right? Okay, I'm seeing some questions on YouTube, and actually one was, are you stopping the development of Starknet on Ethereum? No, of course not. This is a research effort, but the brunt of the work that is being done by the Starknet ecosystem and StarkWare in particular, is still on Starknet itself, right? On scaling the infrastructure that allows it to process more transactions, do more complex smart contract, and do really cool stuff. Yeah, Adrien or Francis, I don't know if you want to comment on this.
Yeah, maybe one way to look at it is some people maybe are familiar with Volition, which is an item on the roadmap, which is slightly different because it doesn't change consensus, but it has to do with DA, with the data availability. And the way we have already discussed how we will probably design Volition for Starknet is to allow developers of smart contract in Starknet to choose where they actually want the DA to happen, right? So what we are offering with Volition is options, is choices. Like the developers can do more stuff if they want to, and I see this extension to Bitcoin a little bit in the same ways that now you will be offered a new consensus to leverage to scale, right? So today, if you do a smart contract in KO on Starknet, you will actually scale Ethereum in the sense that Ethereum will verify the proof that the execution of your smart contract went well. Tomorrow, you will still be able to do that if you want to. We are not removing anything, but on top of that, if you want rather Bitcoin to the consensus of Bitcoin to verify the good execution of your smart contract, you will be able to do that as well, right? So we are just offering more possibilities to developers, and obviously because developers tend to listen to users, then it's probably that it will also be driven by users. So as a user, if for your own reason, and maybe we can try to imagine what could be a good reason, but if you prefer your application to settle on Bitcoin instead of Ethereum, you will be able to do that tomorrow, not tomorrow, but in the future with Starknet, right? So more options, more features in Starknet for both the developers and the users. So we think it's a net value add because it's it's an opportunity to settle on a different chain again if you want to.
Yeah, I think it also opens up the door to a different set of users. Some people are more familiar and more comfortable with Bitcoin than with Ethereum, and vice versa. It offers a platform for both communities to coexist and interact if they so wish, without without an intermediary. On this, Francis, I'm curious, what gets you excited about having like what kind of application? I know it's far in the future, it's hypothetical, but let's dream a little bit, right? What kind of application do you want to see on a Starknet that settles to, well, on a Starknet that settles to Bitcoin, right? And then on a Starknet that settles to both Ethereum and Bitcoin. What gets you excited?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think one of the big features that Bitcoin currently lacks is, and I'll get really narrow, and then I think I'll get a bit more broad. But currently, Lightning Network, as it exists today, I think is a beautiful protocol. The one issue that I currently have with it is that the payments infrastructure requires a liveness requirement. So that essentially means that if I have a channel, as it's called with Henri, and I have a previous state of the channel where I had 1 Bitcoin and Henri had 10 Bitcoin, and then Henri sends 10 Bitcoin to me. If my node goes offline for an extended period of time, Henri can take the opportunity to attempt to publish the previous state of the channel where he validly did have more Bitcoin than I did. And because I'm not online in order to challenge that, Henri could actually take my Bitcoin. So one thing that I'm really excited about zero knowledge proofs in general bringing to Bitcoin is the ability to potentially fix or mitigate some of these liveness issues. So that's one thing. The second thing overall, and this is again is really broad, but expressivity. Bitcoin, generally speaking, it's scaled via channels at this point, and while that's great, and notably doesn't require a second layer of consensus, which is quite interesting. It does leave out some of the composability that you might see in the Ethereum world. So for example, financial apps, which allow you to leverage your Bitcoin in order to borrow USD, or even a USD stablecoin, which is backed by Bitcoin. Now, do I necessarily believe that you should put all of your money in a USD stablecoin backed by Bitcoin, which liquidates as a result of a certain margin call threshold being hit? No, definitely not. In fact, there's even people who would argue against this type of design. But at the same time, I believe that this type of design and a USD stablecoin backed by predominantly Bitcoin could be something which could be very valuable to certain sects of the world. And I think that overall, one thing that Bitcoin should do is provide as many different financial tools to as many different people in ways that they can be useful as it possibly can, and that's not something that it can currently do. And I think an expressive layer on layer 2 would allow it to be much more useful for the variety of people throughout the world.
Fantastic, thank you, Francis. Adrien, any application that gets you excited?
Yeah, I mean, it's there's a comment from Philip in on YouTube, I think, talking about wallets on Bitcoin. So, you probably have your current Bitcoin wallet. It could be a Lightning one, so for example, Phoenix, stuff like that. Obviously, the experience is a lot different from your Argent or Bravos wallet that you have in the Starknet ecosystem, due to the fact that what you can do with it is just what Francis mentioned. So you would imagine that we would bring like the expressivity, the wallet features, not really onto Bitcoin directly, but onto, so it would remain on Starknet, right? But with a Bitcoin that comes directly from the Bitcoin chain. So here you need to be we need to be very clear on what's going to change or not. Like the Argent wallet doesn't really need to change, because from a wallet perspective, it's just another asset on Starknet, right? But the nature of that asset is really different, because today, if you want to interact, quote unquote, with Bitcoin on Starknet, you would have to probably use some kind of wrap version or bridge version. So it's Bitcoin. It's a proxy, right? So you would have, there are all very different ways to do that, but basically you don't have Bitcoin. You have some type of proxy, and you incur some risk, whether it's smart contract risk and or people issuing these Bitcoin to be bothered by law enforcement, etc., etc. So there are a lot of different risks with using these different proxies of Bitcoin, and you can assess that these risks are low, right? I mean, it's not a risky asset. It's just that there are risks. And what we will get by having Starknet to settle on Bitcoin is a pure Bitcoin, if you want to put it like that. Is it would be a Bitcoin directly from the Bitcoin chain that's bridged to Starknet, with a very limited set of risk, right? Because there is no one is minting it. It's directly in protocol, right? So just like ETH is on Starknet today. So a lot of things, for example, for the wallets, will not have to change that much, because that Bitcoin, that new Bitcoin, will just be yet another asset. Its nature will be very different, but from a pure code perspective, for Argent wallet, for Bravos wallet, and OKX and all the wallets on Starknet, it won't be that much different for them. But now you imagine what it enables, right? So you could do everything you do currently with your wallet on Starknet, but using Bitcoin. So obviously there is, as Francis mentioned, it opens all the DeFi, everything. But probably that by the time we are live with this roll-up on Bitcoin, you could imagine that other projects that are currently doing beautiful work on Starknet will also land some more features. And what one I have in mind is, for example, to verify snarks on Bitcoin, and on Starknet. And for example, these teams working on that today, they are not really focused on Bitcoin. They are focused on bringing features to Starknet, but basically Bitcoin will inherit all these features. And one thing that probably we will be able to do by the time we are live is the fact that we will probably be able to build layer 3s, with this pristine Bitcoin. And these layer 3s might have a focus on payments only, for example, to be very efficient at just sending and receiving Bitcoin. And you could also imagine that these layer 3s will have a focus on privacy, maybe. So this type of, and this is what Francis mentioned with expressivity, everything we will be able to do here is really, expanding a lot in terms of design space, right? There are a lot more we can do. And obviously, all this with a set of risk that's like the lower you could get with a verifier on Bitcoin L1.
Super cool. Thank you. One pet peeve of mine, it's very niche and it's not very, very useful yet, I guess, but I don't know, it's intriguing to me, is I don't know how familiar you are with op return, right? The opcode that allows you to just put some hashes on Bitcoin. And it's a way to timestamp stuff. So for example, you have a JSON, you want to prove that you did something at some point, you just put it in op return, and then it's in a Bitcoin block, and you can always point back to it saying, hey, this is something that happened in the past. All of this data right now is not really usable by Bitcoin. I mean, it's you post it and then that's it. It's in a block, but you can't reuse it in a UTXO, and you can't reuse it in a smart contract. It doesn't have teeth. Well, those UTXOs, those op return stuff, you can reuse them now in smart contract. You can actually resurrect that data and use data that was sent to Bitcoin a long time ago in the past and give it another life. And I don't know, it's a bit fascinating to me. The image I have in my head is kind of like, the Voyager spacecraft that was sent in the 70s. Hopefully one day we'll send other spacecrafts in space, and they will go past Voyager and just maybe be able to give it a second life. And being able to verify Bitcoin on Starknet and reuse those operator and stuff that were meant to be dead things inside smart contracts is, I don't know, it's a fascinating pet peeve of mine. Anyway, so there was a question from the audience on. Can you explain a little bit how do users choose where their data will where a user or an app choose where it will be verified?
Yes.
Yeah,
maybe I can take that one because I already mentioned like one of the
take it away, baby.
Sorry.
Sorry, Adrien.
One of the design that we have in mind, and just to be clear, it's not set in stone, right? So what I'm telling you now might not be reality in a couple of months, but what we have in mind today is that it will be at smart contract level on Starknet, right? So it's actually the developer that will decide where the data and the consensus will be operated, right? So as a user, you will have to choose the app based on what the dev has done, right? So the dev, when he puts up his app, he will say, okay, guys, I've developed it in such a way that it's settling on Bitcoin, or it's settling on Ethereum, or it's settling on, or the DA is somewhere else, right? So the dev will be able to give you all this detail. Obviously, you can always check the code. It's blockchain, it's public. Maybe you have to decipher it, but you can always have the answer as a user. But basically, so it will be most likely at smart contract level, and therefore, as a user, you need to investigate that, and probably the people behind the app will tell you where it lives.
Thank you, Adrien. There's another question from Laurie. What's the timeline like? Any rough ideas, like maybe 6 months of research, during which OPCAT is hopefully headed, 6 months of implementation? I think there's various components here, right? There's the OPCAT being on Bitcoin part, and then there's the implementation part. Francis, can you comment on that question? Like, what does the timeline look like, both from the point of view of Bitcoin and from the point of view of research?
Yeah, so in terms of the research side of things, I think that the key is that we put this sort of like, we'd like to put together sort of like a grant council, and we'd like to, again, have like a degree of separation from that, just to, we're advocating for OPCAT, right? So we don't necessarily want to take part in, and partisan the research there. So we want to make sure we put together the best council possible. So that'll take a second. I don't think it'll take too long, but maybe a couple weeks. That funding will hopefully begin to flow out extremely quickly. In terms of like betting on a timeline around OPCAT, it's not something I'm comfortable doing, and it's not something that I necessarily know to do. Bitcoin has to form what we like to call rough consensus around an upgrade. With Taproot, this took quite a while. With OPCAT, I can also see it taking quite a while, whether that be 6 months, a year, 2 years. That's could be any of the above. But all we can really do is try and make sure that the community as a whole has as much knowledge about the risks of OPCAT, the potential benefits of OPCAT, and to make sure we've covered as many of our bases as we possibly can. But we're not in the business of like pricing the likelihood of it happening within 6 months, 12 months, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. And I would add that OPCAT, and amongst other features actually, are already deployed on Bitcoin Inquisition, which later forms Signet. So we have a lot of room. We have places to test everything we do, right? So it's not what we are doing is in a vacuum. So we are really we will be ready the day whether OPCAT or another great script preparation, any soft fork that would give us these features the day they are activated. Hopefully the work will be done on our side, because we would know pretty much what would be coming for since like today already. So that's why it's we can start engaging a lot of power in terms of development, testing, etc.
Well, let's actually dive a bit deeper into this. Let's talk a little bit about implementation. Can you, Mason is asking, what specific technical hurdles do you anticipate when implementing, before deploying Starknet on Bitcoin? What are points that we think are solved, and what are points where we think, oh, there's something here, but we're not sure how we're going to solve it yet? What are the main points that we need to solve?
Yeah, I think again, so like the way I like to break this down is sort of you have like a big three of your technical introduction of Stark proof verification or L2 rollup integration into Bitcoin. The first one of those is obviously Stark proof verification. So to attack that one first, we've already come quite a ways in actually implementing a Stark verifier on Bitcoin. I'd say we're 90% of the way done. You should expect to see some testnet transactions in the not so distant future. So from that, first prong, I would say the most important and challenging hurdle for us is to make sure that we have the ability to audit that script well. It is not necessarily super easy to write in a low-level language like what Bitcoin script offers. So as a result, there hasn't been a lot of incentive to do it in the past either. So we really need to make sure that we audit this well. So I would say on the first prong, that's the big hurdle. The second prong, I think, is the ability to split up UTXOs via covenants. So Andrew Polstra, I believe, has a paper out on how to use OpCat covenants. We haven't seen a lot of OpCat covenants on testnet in the past. So how rough the user experience, we know that they're possible, right? But like to understand exactly what the user experience of those is going to feel like, I believe that's also a technical hurdle. The third prong I like to think of as sort of like the data availability or the state differential. So what are we committing to? We know that those will be state differentials in the case of Starknet. But then the really big question is where they're going to be, right? With volition type models, you can have your data availability / your state differentials in a couple different spots. We can put them on pure Bitcoin. And there may be some scaling issues with that. We can also put them on something like Celestia or Eigenlayer DA, and then maybe you get some really deep Bitcoiners who have some security concerns with that. And then in a kind of a third area there is you can even have like what we call power users via Adamcium, who actually hold the data availability and state differentials themselves. Or we can do some kind of hybrid of all three. So with the third prong, I think we really need to come to a decision. We've already seen data availability and state differentials posted onto Bitcoin. We can thank the Satria team, whose testnet recently came out on being kind of the first team to put some state differentials on top of Bitcoin. So kudos to them there. But those are what I really view as being the big technical hurdles. None of them seem gigantic from an implementation standpoint, but I would say, one of the biggest technical hurdles is just auditing the verifier. And I think we need to take that with a very, very high degree of seriousness.
Well, thank you. That's very in-depth. Okay, I'm going through the questions, so they're great. Feel free to keep them coming. It's really interesting.
Yeah, we have another one from Mason, same person, asking about OPCAT and the impact of the overall security of Bitcoin. So I think it's an excellent question, and it's definitely on spot related to the fund that we will create. Today, I can say that there is no known potential vulnerability with OPCAT. The issue is really not with what we know today. It's more like the question is which level of comfort do we need to reach to be kind of reassured that there is no unknown, right? And you will never know by definition. But you will need to spend enough effort, and the question is, how do you define enough, right? But we, as a community, we need to spend enough effort attacking OPCAT, and obviously, ideally, not finding bugs or finding bugs and fixing them. But we need to spend enough effort attacking it, and actually concluding that there is no vel, right? For now, that we know, obviously everything is it's you never know for sure for everything in the future, but we need to be as a community in a position to say we feel safe now activating OPCAT, because we spend so much money, so much manpower, excellent devs, excellent security researchers have tried to attack it, and they failed, right? So it's not really a positive answer, but it's more like a negative one. But that's the way we do things. And yeah, do you want to add anything?
Yeah. I guess I'd add. So like you can think of like first order effects, and then you can think of second order effects. So on the first order effects side, are we likely to see an inflation bug in OpCat or something like that? Probably not, right? Like I think people have been proposing OpCat, and it was previously in Bitcoin's code base, and it's been kind of re-proposed thanks to Ethan Heilman since like 2015. So I think that the first order concerns are unlikely. Where I do think it would be really interesting to jump in quickly is some of these second order effects of introducing OpCat and expressivity on top of Bitcoin. And in that sense, I think we should briefly chat about miner extractable value. Now, I will say that some of this stuff is very not well defined at this point. But specifically, miner extractable value means like essentially additional value that miners can extract as a result of their role in choosing which transactions are included in blocks. And you essentially don't want miners to be able to benefit so much from a change that it introduces additional centralizing pressure. So with something like OpCat, for one, hypothetically, it could become possible to build an automated market maker on layer 1 Bitcoin. Now, is that likely? Is that something that we expect to see happen? Will you get good user experience from that? Will you get good execution on price from that? Will there likely to be a lot of liquidity that accrues there? Probably not, right? You have 10-minute blocks. So you can imagine Uniswap. Uniswap currently has about 12-second confirmation times. If we all of a sudden, push that over to 10 minutes, it starts to look a little bit wonky. Another concern that people frequently bring up is what we call base rollups, where the sequencing, again, happens on the layer 1. So again, Bitcoin has 10-minute blocks. Sequencing things on layer 1 doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. So if we jump into the second order, you also have the ability to have an open validator set on the layer 2. So if someone decides to be a sequencer on Starknet, potentially that could be a miner, and miners could extract additional value by being a sequencer on the layer 2 Starknet. So that is where I think there becomes a little bit more of a solid argument around how this could introduce some new incentives to Bitcoin. Now, whether those new incentives are bad, whether those new incentives are good, whether those new incentives don't matter because of a division of labor, and it's unlikely to see L1 Bitcoin miners become sequencers on the L2. I think those are some of the questions that we need to discuss much further. But it opens us up to what I would describe as sort of like a preference of what kind of L2 we'd like to see built on top of Bitcoin. And some people have advocated deep in the Bitcoin community for closed sequencer sets, where you have the ability to force an exit from the layer 2, as you have with StarkX today. StarkX currently, you have a closed sequencer set. There's one sequencer. However, if that sequencer decided to try and disappear, the users would still be able to reclaim the funds from the layer 2 back to the layer 1. So this sort of it represents a dichotomy. On one side, you want to potentially have a decentralized layer 2, but maybe that opens us up to some MEV concerns. Maybe you want to have a closed sequencer, but now you don't have quite all of the censorship-free properties that you would otherwise have. So I went a little bit deep there. I apologize for that. Hopefully it was concise and insightful to some. But I think that most of the effects of CAT, just to reiterate what I was trying to say here, are probably more along the second order effects. And it's important that we do discuss miner extractable value when we're kind of appraising the risk associated with OpCat.
Thank you. Okay, we have a question from Lekos Monot, who is saying, I'm not an L2, you're the L2. Or, if Starknet can verify Bitcoin, does that make Bitcoin a layer 2 of Starknet? The answer to that is no, not really. Like, what defines a layer 2 is that the layer 2 has its state dependent on what happens on layer 1, right? So depending on what happens on Ethereum, the state of Starknet is affected. But the state of Starknet doesn't affect the state of Ethereum in any other way than being a regular transactions, right? Ethereum can survive without Starknet. Starknet can't survive without Ethereum. So Starknet being a layer 2 on top of Bitcoin would mean that without Bitcoin, Starknet would have a hard time moving forward. And but Starknet disappearing would never affect Bitcoin.
Maybe I can take the next one.
Go
Ryan asked about block space and finality. So, as you know, Ethereum has some parameters, Bitcoin has different parameters. So we will basically adapt to what makes sense for each chain, right? So if we feel like we need to bury Starknet chain under X amount of blocks, meaning X amount of POW, we will do so, right? So it's really these are really parameters that we will have to define, but we can definitely play with them, right? So it's there is not really a concern. It's more about, okay, what are the value for these parameters? Why are we choosing these values? And what are the consequences of such assumption? Are we going to verify proof on Bitcoin? How many times per day are we going to verify it? Basically, that's the question, right? And it actually
it ties nicely into the following question.
Yes,
like, what
exactly.
do you have an estimate of cost? Like, will settling on Bitcoin be more expensive than?
So this is like, I could say, like, Bitcoin and Ethereum are so different that it's very hard to reply to this question because the layer one are different. But if you go into the imaginary world and you kind of try to compare what's not comparable, yes, Bitcoin will be a bit more expensive, but again, it's because we have these parameters that we can play with, and probably we will definitely verify less frequently on Bitcoin versus Ethereum, because Ethereum has 12-second block and Bitcoin has 10 minutes, so the difference is huge. So it might be at the end that it won't be more expensive, but there will be trade-offs just because these chains are so different.
Thank you. Then we have another question from Angela Bastos, which is, what happens if mommy and daddy fight? What happens if app X settles on Ethereum, app Y settles on Bitcoin? And then there's a conflict. One of the chains reorgs, and then it messes up sequencing. I think it's a really interesting question, and truth is, there's not really an answer yet. That's what makes this research so exciting. There's a lot of things to be determined, and a lot of choices to be made. Francis or Adrian, I don't know if you want to comment on this one.
No, yeah, it's definitely design choices that we'll have to explore in the coming weeks and months.
I need to read this like 7 times before I answer it. App X settles in Ethereum, App Y on Bitcoin. App X interacts with App Y, then later Ethereum forks to a timestamp before this interaction. Since App X doesn't have the prove on Ethereum now.
I think essentially what this person is saying is, what happens if one of the chain, Bitcoin or Ethereum, reorgs and it affects what and it goes back to a previous state, right? How does that work in that case? I think in that case, well, first of all, if you have proofs of Starknet down the line, then you can probably still reuse them, right? You can just replay the proofs; they're still valid. But if there's an alternate version of Starknet that is produced, that's more problematic. And truth is, we're not sure yet.
I think it depends if the proof has to validate against both. If you're deciding, so if Ethereum rolls back and your app only settles on Bitcoin, then you should be okay. But if your app settles on both, then I believe there would be a concern there. Now, I think that there's
there's an issue. Even if you settle only on Bitcoin, there's an issue because the proof will not verify the global state of Starknet, and even if the Ethereum state is not sent on Bitcoin, the hash of that state, the root of that state, will still be sent on Bitcoin and verified there. So if you have two conflicting things, then that will be complicated.
That's true.
But I guess we'll find out. That's what makes it exciting, right? It's if we add all the answers, then this thing would already be live. So just stay tuned. And if you have an opinion on these things, do participate in the community forum. These are legitimately interesting questions. These are entirely new designs, and this is why we're excited about this thing, and this is why there's so many people asking questions and getting involved. So join the fray. Okay, we have Laurie asking, can a transaction settle on both L1s? If not, what about a multiple that is supposed to settle on both? I think here, yeah, I think there's a difference between state and transaction. I'm not sure how to make an educated answer here. All right.
Yeah, I think we will be able to reply to this question later. Like this is not.
We need Louis is our so this is the idea of this is based off of a rollout which was created by James Prestwich. Louis Guzman is our local expert on that. Lori, I tried to actually DM you so that we can find some more time to chat about this one-on-one or in a larger group. Unfortunately, the second I did that, my Twitter got locked. So I promised to DM you shortly.
No, but I think specifically, like a transaction settling to both L1, like the current design we have would be that state transitions for a Starknet block would be the same proof would be valid on both chains, or maybe they will be formatted a bit differently, but the same state transitions would be validated by both chains. What would be different is that some areas of the state will be verified at the same time as the proof on the two different chains, right? and Bitcoin will make sure that that some part of the state has been validated, and it will keep, the latest verified state of Starknet on Bitcoin will be a specific version. Now, if Ethereum rolls back and there is a different version of Starknet that is verified on that specific version of Ethereum, then you'll have a fork effectively between Bitcoin Starknet and Ethereum Starknet. That would be an extraordinary event, and at this point, effectively, probably both chains would be forked. But at least the last time I talked with Louis, that's how he sold it. Like, yeah, it will be forked, but we'll see. And I want to also point out that it's actually more likely that this happens the other way. I mean, the likelihood for Ethereum to reorg is lower than the likelihood of Bitcoin, for example, having dead blocks after two blocks, right? There's more reorgs on Bitcoin than on Ethereum, but deep reorgs are extremely rare and are very low likelihood to happen on Bitcoin. So, but yeah, there will have to be design choices. I think there's also a big design choice around the consensus of Starknet, whether it's kept on Ethereum, on Bitcoin, or a mix of both. All right. So what do we see now? So Philip is saying if the chain have a reorg, okay. So this we addressed. We can see people discussing in the comment. I love that. So Emmanuel is asking, what makes Starknet unique in scaling on Bitcoin? Francis, do you want to take a jab at this one?
Yeah. So I think it's more about Stark proofs, right? I think Stark proofs are unique because they're very reliant on Merkle path verification. And opcat is the perfect opcode for Merkle path verification. This is because opcat allows you to concatenate two objects within the script, and we already have op SHA-256. So essentially, outside of either first order of perfectness, op Stark verify, and then second order of perfectness, op Merkle tree verify, it doesn't really get much more efficient than opcat, given that we already have op SHA-256. So the ability to use op SHA-256 and opcat again allows us to verify Merkle trees in a very streamlined path.
Perfect. That makes sense. Thank you. And I think we're through with most questions. So maybe let's wrap it up. We've been at it for about 50 minutes, and it's been really interesting. Um, yeah, maybe one last technical question. There's various chains who are modeled after Bitcoin, Litecoin, Dogecoin. Would it be possible for OP-Cat to be deployed on Dogecoin, even though it's a dog chain? Francis, do you want to take that one?
Can you repeat the question one more time? Something
Sure.
about Dogecoin?
No, it's OP-Cat. If OP-Cat were deployed on similar chains to Bitcoin, Dogecoin is modeled after Bitcoin,
Oh man,
but it's a
so
dog chain. Would it
I
be
want
problematic to have an OP-Cat with a cat?
I want it. Okay. So unfortunately, Dogecoin is like 2 soft forks behind Bitcoin. The core maintainers, I guess, of Dogecoin are Patrick Lauder is one of the coolest guys I've met in the crypto space. He's both generous with his time, smart, and really good at explaining things and teaching us. Unfortunately, Dogecoin is still a little bit behind Bitcoin, so this is unlikely. But from a pure memetic standpoint, I think that OpCat on Dogecoin, it would be just unbelievable. Of course, Litecoin is a little bit more caught up to Bitcoin at this stage. However, we have, I mean, just being honest here, we've seen other activations on Litecoin in the past, and it's not like they got a ton of use case to allow us to really understand some of these second order effects better. For example, like Litecoin activated extension blocks with Mimblewimble, and we haven't seen a lot of utility there. So it's possible that we see either Dogecoin, if it really hits the jets, or Litecoin decide to activate OpCat, and I would encourage both to do so. But neither one are guaranteed. I also think Liquid is a really interesting place for you guys and everyone to just experiment with some of this stuff. In addition to OpCat, Liquid has a lot of opcodes that Bitcoin currently doesn't have. So everything, and then but there's a lot of stuff on Liquid that Bitcoin currently doesn't have, to be fair. But at the same time, it does have OpCat, so we could potentially deploy some of this stuff on Liquid and use real Bitcoin within a sort of federated multisig and explore how useful some of this stuff can be.
Thank you. This actually was a great answer to a bad pun on my end. That's a nice roundup. Adrien, Francis, you want to say anything to conclude?
Nope. Thank you. It was great.
Fantastic. So thank you everyone for attending this. Thank you everyone for attending the space. Stay tuned to hear more about the research. Do ask questions, get involved, dig into the repo, make pull requests. All of this is happening right in front of your eyes, and you can be a part of it. So get involved. Just do stuff. This is how we move things forward. Thank you, everyone.